I first came to NC State 42 years ago as a freshman, which, quite frankly, still boggles the mind for me. I was very fortunate. My freshman year, we won the national championship in basketball. My last year on my PhD, we won the national championship in basketball. Clearly, I need to go back to school. But it is our pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for coming out on kind of a dreary evening. I think the reason that you're here is because the subject we have today is something I think is important. And I am a product of NC State. I would hate to think how my life would have been different had I not had that opportunity. So my goal tonight is to provide you with some strategies if you've got an interest in that institution. And yes, there are other good schools in the state of North Carolina, but there are many that are unique, and NC State is one of them. And particularly if you're interested in agriculture and life sciences, we believe that we are the place to be in the state of North Carolina. I want to show you a slide just right after this one that's from a movie that came out last fall called Interstellar. Anybody in the audience see that movie? A couple, yeah. It's a Christopher Nolan film. He's the guy who did the Batman trilogy and a movie called Inception, which I have yet to figure out. But I want to show you this clip simply because I think it points out why what we do in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences is important.
You're a well-educated man, Coop, and a trained pilot.
And an engineer.
The world doesn't need any more engineers. We didn't run out of planes and television sets. We ran out of food.
Now, when I show that clip, the dean of the College of Engineering gets a little bit upset with me. We do need engineers. But the point of the film was, if you don't have food, having a flat-screen TV, jet airplanes, and microwaves is of little use. So fundamentally, at the end of the day, I would rather have a 4-ounce baked potato than 4 ounces of gold if I'm hungry. So what we do at the college focuses clearly on that necessity. In fact, if you've looked in your local bookstore, there have been a number of books published that talk about issues related to the food system globally. In fact, Paul Roberts, who wrote the book The End of Food, was on campus last year and spoke in a seminar. If you look at some of the headlines, this is from Science Daily, said food shortages could be the most critical world issue by mid-century. Scientific American. Food shortages bring down civilization. People will tolerate a lot of things. What they will not tolerate is seeing their children hungry. So if we want peace in the world, we need to figure out how we're going to feed the world. This is a quote from United Nations Secretary General, who points out that by 2050, we're expecting 9 billion people on this planet. Now, I was born in 1955. There were 3 billion people on the planet. If I'm fortunate enough to live to be 95, the human population will have tripled in my lifetime. That still seems quite a bit away, but by 2030, we're going to need to produce 50% more food than we do today on less land, with less inputs, with less water, and a whole host of things. So hopefully there's some young lady or young man in this room who's going to come to NC State and figure out how we're going to feed those 9 billion people. Because the way we're doing it right now will not put us in a position to be successful to do that. Well, part of this is talking about education. I'm a big believer in education, how it changes individuals, it changes families, it changes communities. Here's some stats from Georgetown University. If you've got a high school degree, your lifetime earnings is about $1.3 million. If you get a bachelor's degree, 2.2, and then if you go on and get a professional degree, $3.6 million. Money is not everything, but in many ways it makes life easier and gives you more opportunities. So I'm convinced that education not only rises up individuals, but communities. This is a map of the state of North Carolina. The counties that are in orange have less than half the national average for four-year college degrees. Those counties in green exceed the national average. So I want you to look and see where those counties are at and see the trends that tend to follow that. The top 10 most affluent counties in the state of North Carolina are clustered in three areas: the Charlotte area, the Triangle, and then I was a little puzzled about the Northeast, why that was so affluent. There's a lot of folks who find out that they like to vacation and retire at the Outer Banks. So those are the three clusters, the 10 most affluent counties in the state. In many cases, there's a high correlation between the percent of that county's population that has a college degree and their earning potential. Unemployment. This is a little bit stale, I will admit. January 2014, thankfully things have gotten better. But you'll see those dark counties indicate areas where we have among the highest unemployment. Look at the counties that are in that kind of goldenrod color. You see Wake County here. Johnston County has a low unemployment rate as well. So correlated with education is lower unemployment. SNAP, or food stamps, supplemental nutrition funds. In Wake County, only 8% of the citizens receive those funds. In other counties, it's close to 30%. And again, if you look at the correlation between educational attainment and food stamp recipients, it's highly correlated. So those are some of the reasons why I'm convinced that education is important. So whether you come to NC State or some other institution, I hope you'll go, because it'll impact your life and the life of your family and your community. Somebody asked me, he said, well, doesn't everybody who applies to NC State get in? That was never true, and it's certainly not true today. Back in the early 1990s, we only had about 10,000 applicants. People started figuring out that the degree programs at NC State produce people who are job ready, who can get a position and begin a career. In that 20-year period, the applicant rate has doubled. And for the past 4 years, we've been above 20,000 applicants. I have no desire to be in the admissions department having to look at 20,000 applications. It is a real task. I argue, though, that at NC State, we ought to reflect the ideals that Jim Collins talked about in his book, Good to Great. His philosophy was that you ought to focus on things that you can be really good at. And at NC State, we can be really good at agriculture. In fact, if you look at the university, we are the 4th best overall public university value. That means you get a lot of bang for your dollar. We're 7th in the country in industry research funding. Wall Street Journal says that we're in the top 20 where corporations come to identify new talent. We're 17th in the world in plant and animal sciences. Not in the United States. We're 17th in the world. And according to the QS Limited database, we're 14th in ag and forestry. So at NC State, we can be really good in agriculture. These are ratings from the National Taiwan University System. And I'll point these out. Plant and animal science, we're 17th. Ag science, 18th. Agriculture, 24th in the world. And not to be disrespectful of my colleagues in physics at NC State, they're ranked 286th in the world. We're never going to compete with MIT or Caltech in physics. We can compete with the best in the world in agriculture. And that's why I'm convinced that as an institution, we need to focus on the opportunities that agriculture and the life sciences provide. Many of you have dealt with return on investment, ROI. And I told you there are many good institutions of higher learning in North Carolina. This is from payscale.com. And Duke University was ranked #1 on return on investment. And what they determined the 20-year ROI to be is what you would have earned in 20 years after a Duke degree, minus what you would have earned with a high school diploma, minus whatever your tuition costs were, and minus whatever interest you had to pay on loans. So Duke University was number one. But you had to pay nearly $250,000 to get a Duke education. Wake Forest University was number two in the state of North Carolina. Again, you're going to pay over $200,000. The third and first public institution for return on investment is North Carolina State. That degree back in 2013 would cost you about $83,000. That's still a lot of money, but it's a darn sight less than $250,000. And I'm happy to point out what number 6 was rated at that institution. For full disclosure, both of my children went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and it's their mother's fault. We made the mistake of telling our children you can go anywhere you can get in. Our son got into Duke, Wake Forest, and Carolina. I was saying, please pick Carolina. While I'm not fond of Carolina blue, I'm really fond of green. So he said, NC State is a great return on investment. If you look at the Rural Center, they classify North Carolina counties. 85 are described as rural, and 15 are described as urban. And you can see those urban counties, they're clustered around the I-40-85 corridor. A couple exceptions on the coast, and then Asheville up in Buncombe County. But let me show you a trend that I'm concerned about. Those 15 urban counties represent about 51% of the state's population. Yet at NC State, we see a growing trend of more and more students coming from urban counties. The green bars are the College of Ag and Life Sciences. The red bars are the university. And you can see fall of 2014, nearly 67% of all our students at NC State came from 15 urban counties. Yet they only represent 51.5% of the state's population. The college does a little bit better. We're almost right on line with that urban-rural split. My concern, I grew up in Yadkin County in the foothills. I came from a rural county. I mentioned earlier that when I was a freshman, I went to Carter Finley Stadium. There were twice as many people in the stadium as the county I grew up in. So I know what it's like to come from a rural community. If 67% of our students are coming from those 15, that doesn't give us a lot of opportunity for the 85 counties that are not classified as urban. What do our students want to do at the college? This is from the group that entered last fall. 45% say they want to be veterinarians. We need veterinarians. I'm not sure we need 45% of the freshman class to become veterinarians. And we have increased the number of students at vet school to 100. But we're going to have a lot of folks who desire to be a veterinarian. They're not going to be able to do that. I hope Animal Related has some people who are interested in hogs and beef cattle and chickens and turkeys. Agribusiness, biotech, production ag, and you can see those other areas. So that's a snapshot of the class that entered last fall. Where do they come from? The eastern two-thirds of the state is where our students come from. Vast majority of them, or a little bit over half, from central North Carolina. The east provides about a quarter. And only about 4% of our students come from the western part of the state. Part of that's just sheer geography. It's closer to go to Tennessee or Clemson for some students than it is to come to Raleigh. And there is 1% of our students are international at the undergraduate level. That's small, but that's a growing percentage. Out of state, 16%. You know, the state of North Carolina has a regulation that we can have no more than 18% of our student body out of state, and that includes internationals. So at the college level, we're right up against that percentage at 17. Where do our students come from? About 42% come as new freshmen. 35% are what are called internal transfers. You start out in one degree program and decide this is not for me, and you'll transfer into another. I changed majors 3 times as an undergraduate. I started off in biology. I ultimately ended up in poultry science. But I did graduate in 4 years because Mom and Dad said the first 4 years are on us. After that, you're going to pay for it. The Ag Institute is one way that students have come into the 4-year program, although it's a small percentage, about 1%. The community college system, about 7.5% of our students go 2 years to community college, and then other 4-year institutions, about 15%. So there are multiple ways to come into NC State. I told you earlier that I had friends who said, well, everybody who applies to state gets in, don't they? The green bars are the college admissions rate, and the red bars are the university. Back in 1983, 7 out of 10 students who applied to NC State were admitted. And you can see the trend that has occurred since that time. In fact, at the low point back in 2013, the university had about 47% admitted, and the college was even lower than that, was about 43%. We came up a little bit last year, and we're going to be right at 50% this year. But it's changed dramatically, and part of that change, again, is that we used to have 10,000 applicants. We now have 20,000 applicants. So here are the admissions metrics comparing the college to the university for 2014. For the university, about 51% were admitted who applied. For the college, about 46%. And you can see some of the differences relative to ethnic and gender groups. We've got some work cut out for us if we want to embrace a diverse campus. And there's some challenges that we have that we still have to work on. Shown here are institutions that we describe as peers. The green bars are schools that are rated by Peterson's as very difficult. The other schools are rated as difficult. Here's the difference. Of course, UNC Chapel Hill admits less than 1/3 of the people who apply. Very difficult. We're in mid-47s. But I have people tell me, I don't understand why my nephew is waitlisted at NC State. He's already been admitted at Auburn. And this is no disrespect to Auburn. They have a different model. But Auburn admits 82% of the people who apply. It's a different model that they have. Clemson's in the mid-50s. Mississippi State, you can see there. If you compare within the UNC system, admission rates are very different. UNC Wilmington, App, Asheville, Pembroke, East Carolina. Again, this is not criticism of those other institutions. They just have a different admissions model. They admit a higher percentage. So that's one reason why you may be competitive at one school, but not at another. These data are a little bit stale. They're 2012, but they're the most recent ones I can find that look at SAT scores across the UNC system. And by SAT scores, I'm just referring to math and the verbal score, not all three. And you can see the UNC Chapel Hill has the highest, NC State was second, and there's about a 400-point differential across the 16-member institutions. So again, what's competitive at one school may not be at another. Well, I'm glad there's some young men in the room. Many of you are probably not old enough to recognize this movie. It came out in 1960. Connie Francis and Where the Boys Are. It was about a group of Midwest college students who were going to Fort Lauderdale for spring break. And the reason I'm talking about that is that there's a national trend. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times recently that was entitled Wayward Sons, the Emerging Gender Gap in Labor Markets and Education. And I tell people all the time that clearly I have a mother, I have a sister, I have a wife, I have a daughter. I am all for access for women to education. But I do get concerned when I see some of the data points that are coming up. 35-year-olds with a 4-year degree. Back in the early 60s, males had a much higher percentage of college degrees than women. Whole new era opened up. Opportunity for women has expanded. And today, that has totally reversed. And in fact, that percentage is diverging as we go forward. Relative to males, more and more females are getting college degrees. Here's what's happened in the College of Ag and Life Sciences. Green's 2013 Red 2014, and the yellow bars are people who applied and have been admitted in 2015. For this year to date, of students admitted to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, 78% are female. So young men in the room, the young ladies in your classes are studying, they have better grades, they're working hard, they're in leadership roles. So guys, you need to work hard because the females in your classes are certainly doing that. A number of you in this room are probably pre-high school, and that's actually good. I want to, if you leave with any idea tonight, I hope one of them is that you really need to prepare early. I tell students all the time, your freshman year is more important than your senior year. And they look at me like I'm crazy. When you apply to NC State, your freshman grades will be on that application. They won't have your senior grades. My cousin's married to a guy who drives in NASCAR, and he happens to be the defending Sprint Cup champion, Kevin Harvick. And Kevin told me a lesson. He said, you cannot win the race on the first lap, but you can darn well lose it. The analogy I give you is that you can't get into NC State after your freshman year in high school, but you can probably put yourself in a hole where you will not get in as a freshman. Start at the get-go. Spend time in your studies. Let me give you an example. The average high school GPA for admitted students in the college was a 4.4. My wife's an ordained minister. She tells me that confession is good for the soul. I did not have a 4.4 high school GPA. I didn't have a 4.0 high school GPA. Well, I think I'll stop there. The point is the impact of AP and honors classes on your high school GPA drives that overall average up. Let me give you an example. Enloe High School, an elite high school in Wake County, in 2013-14 they offered over 70 AP classes. Not 70 different courses, but 70 different classes. I went to Forbush High School in Yadkin County, and that same time they offered 4. Who do you think is going to have a higher high school GPA if I'm picking from 70 classes versus 4? And you can see some of these other ones. My kids went to Athens Drive. They had 25. That's still more than 5 times what the high school that I went to. So in urban areas, they're going to have that advantage. It's not fair. I wish we would go back and just look at things based on an unweighted average, quite frankly. This is the number of AP exams taken. You know, if you get a 3 or a 4 on an AP exam, many times you can get college credit. Now, I know that there's a difference in population. Mecklenburg had over 9,000 AP tests. Pamlico County only had 110. But when you adjust for population, Wake and Mecklenburg were right at 100. Pamlico was pretty close. And you can see some of those others. Counties, Johnson County is listed there. So about 40% less relative to Wake County, even when you adjust for population. Many times I'll encounter a student who's applied to NC State and they've taken the ACT or the SAT one time. And I cringe when I hear that because 55% of the people who take those standardized tests do better the second time. If I were to tell you, if you follow this route, 55% of the time you'll earn more money, I think that's probably a good odd. So I encourage you to take it more than once. In 2013, people who took the ACT more than once, 57% increased their composite score. But only 43% took them more than once. My son came home the first time he took the SAT, he was wore out. He said, "Dad, that's a long test. It's like 4 hours." I said, "Yeah, I told you to go to sleep early, bring 2 calculators, get a good breakfast. It's an endurance test." It's a little bit like, I was scared to death when we brought our first child home from the hospital. I didn't know what I was getting into. The second one, I was a whole lot more relaxed. I learned that they were pretty tough. And when you dropped the pacifier, you didn't have to boil it. If you take that ACT or SAT class once, you know what to expect the second time. You'll relax a little bit, you'll do better. So here's a curve that shows the likelihood of your ACT score being higher the second time. If you, say, scored a 21 on the first time you took it, your odds are better than 50-50 that you'll score higher the second time. Second take-home message for tonight, take the ACT or SAT more than once. There's a lot of factors that influence how well you do on the SAT. Some of them are outside of your control. I know some really smart young men and women who just don't do well on standardized tests. But there's some other things that we can do. Parental education level, if you look in, this is data from the state of North Carolina. In households where one of the parents has got a college degree, in general their children tend to score higher as well. High school GPA. The better your high school GPA, typically the higher your SAT score. And it's determined to some degree on what mathematics you take. Students in high school who take calculus score higher than those whose highest math they take is Algebra 2. It's important that you know what your competition is. These are data from the fall of 2014 class. The average SAT, math and verbal, was a 1225 for Cal students. I can go ahead and tell you that for this year, it's down a little bit. It's at 1220, but not a whole lot. Nearly 60% of the students that were admitted in 2014 were in the top 10% of their high school class. And their average high school GPA was a 4.43. I have failed tonight if you go home and say, I'm never going to NC State because I don't have 1200 or 4.4. Because there's more than one way to get there. There are people who made above that and people who made below it. Some of it depends on what program you're interested in. In 2014, we had a little over 1,500 students who applied to the College of Ag and Life Sciences. Over 800 of them applied to one department, animal science. Anybody want to guess why? They believe that animal science is the best path to vet school. And since I'm a poultry science guy, I argue that we need chicken and turkey vets. So if you're going to apply to animal science, you've got a lot of competition. Biochemistry was our second highest, a little less short of 200. Every other program had less than 100 applicants. So the competition for animal science and biochemistry is pretty doggone high. High school GPAs. If you want to go to biochemistry, that's where many of our pre-meds go. Average high school GPA was a 4.6. I cannot figure out how you get that. My people, poultry science was a 4.2, which is still a whole lot higher than what I had. But it varies by over half a point from turf grass and soils up to biochemistry. SATs. Biochemistry students look a lot like engineers relative to their academic profile. 1,300 for biochemistry. But again, 200-point differentials. Poultry science and plant biology are on the other end of the curve, but they're still above 1,100. Again, that's the average. So some of them made 1,200, some of them made 1,000. I want to talk to you a little bit about Joe and Debbie Gordon and a program that they have helped fund that will have an impact, I hope, on the next generation of rural North Carolina students who want to come to NC State. They made a commitment to the tune of $3 million to help underwrite a program called STEAM, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute, which is a unique transfer program that they are committed to, as well as a program called A.S.P.I.R.E. But I did want to introduce the Gordons to you because their gift over the next 3 to 5 years will make a huge impact on rural North Carolina. A.S.P.I.R.E. A.S.P.I.R.E. began as acquiring SAT prep in rural education. And you know the state of North Carolina is really moving pretty rapidly to the ACT, so we changed it. It's now ACT Supplemental Prep in Rural Education. This program has benefited mightily from the support Organizations like Ag Carolina, the North Carolina Pork Council, Golden Leaf, the North Carolina Agricultural Foundation, the Poultry Federation, the Grange Farm Bureau, the Rural Center, on and on. And this program partners with Princeton Review and Kaplan for a ACT, SAT prep course. And I will tell you that in many cases, students who go through this class score 150 points higher on the SAT. 150 points can be the difference between getting in and not getting in. It involves 30 hours of classroom instruction. You've got to be committed. It's 6 weekends. We ask that students put up some money, and if they go to all 6 of those sessions and take the practice exams, we tear the check up. We want them to have a little skin in the game because somebody says, hey, we're going to the beach this weekend, won't you go with us? If they don't have any money invested in it, sometimes they'll choose poorly. But again, many cases you can pay $700, $800, $900 for prep courses, and we've been convinced that this is a good thing. I tell people all the time that while the journey is important, the destination is what matters. How you get to NC State is less important to me than the fact that you get to NC State. Whether that's going 2 years to a community college and transferring in, or whether it's coming in as a STEAM student. In fact, the university is probably going to grow far more via transfers than new incoming freshmen. In fact, if you look at our 2020 enrollment plan, new freshmen will grow 1%. Transfers are going to grow 38%. So the likelihood of coming in as a freshman relative to transfers, we're going to see transfers grow even more. Now I mentioned the STEAM program. You know, we like to use acronyms at the university about as much as the military does, and STEAM represents Student Transfer Enrollment Advising and Mentoring Program. Each year we invite approximately 100 students who were either waitlisted or just below that line, that cut score, where they were denied, but they were close. We hope to get 50 of them that will accept our invitation. It is a 2-semester structured program. They come to NC State Summer Session 2 after their high school year, take 2 classes, live on campus, get an ID, get an email address at NC State. They'll meet with our academic advisors. They will be given a specified program of study for the next 2 semesters that they have to take somewhere else. Many go to a local community college. And here's the good part. If you have 30 transferable hours and a 3.0 GPA for the classes that you took at the NC State and the community college, you are guaranteed a spot the start of your sophomore year. There are very few things in life that are guaranteed. This is one of them. Let me repeat that. 30 transferable hours, 3.0 GPA, you're guaranteed access to an ag-related major at NC State. We've gone through 2 groups. We're getting ready to send out invitations to our 3rd group. Cohort 1, our first group over a year ago, went to Summer Session 2. They had a college GPA of a 3.71. Ranged from a 3 to a 4, and over 45% had a 4.0. The second group last summer came in. Not to be outdone, their average was a 3.89. Again, range was a 3 to a 4, and almost 70% had a 4.0. What does that tell you? If given the opportunity, those young men and women can be successful. So the great thing about STEAM is that we bring you back in the fall semester for a weekend. We'll go to a football game, we'll get academic advising, you'll do a service project, then we bring you back in the spring, get you prepared to come to NC State. It is a great program, and it's because of the folks like Joe and Debbie Gordon that we're able to do that. Here's a quote from a young lady who came to NC State. She said, STEAM was an amazing experience. It was a great opportunity to get a feel for NCSU and get a taste of college life. I feel like it prepared me to have a successful freshman year. I cannot wait to come back as a member of the pack. Now, I know when you're 17 years old and all your friends are going away to college, you might be disappointed that you're going to community college for 1 year. Again, the journey is not as important as the destination. Getting to NC State's what I want you to focus on. And finally, something that I'm reminded every day, every time you're fed, thank someone who wears red, because I do not take for granted that my grocery store is going to be full because of men and women in this state who produce the great bounty that we enjoy. Thank you very much.